While many dentists get out of dental school and jump right into work, others end up years into a practice and feel like they're chained to their chair or spinning their wheels. At Duckett Ladd, we've discovered that there are 6 phases of long-term practice success. On this podcast, we'll explore each phase of success and help you on your growth journey.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Dental Momentum Podcast powered by Duckett Ladd Dental CPAs and Advisors. Jared Duckett back at you with another video to help you get better. And guys, today continuing, I keep saying this right, continuing this 6-part series on practice transitions. We've had all kinds of guests on here, and guys, there's no other person I'd like to bring on than my good friend, Kyle Francis with PTS, founder and president. Kyle, how you doing, man?
You're doing great, my man. Thanks for the invite.
For sure, man. And when I was kind of putting this series together, you know, I've got doctors, I've got attorneys, just all kinds of experience. Your name came almost first to mind of just knowing the ins and outs of a practice transition. I mean, your company's called Professional Transition Strategies. So
Great.
What best to just dive in. And so let's just dive in, man. What do you do at your company? What's your company do? How do you help dental practice owners? And then we'll go through your journey and that sort of thing, but dive in.
Yeah, love it. So I'll tell you what I'm passionate about first, right? And what I'm passionate about is helping doctors make really, really great decisions with typically their biggest asset, right? Essentially the way that I end up looking at things, and the way that we end up looking at things as a company is going to be that, you know, we're not going to be living it afterwards. It's the doctor who's going to be living it. And so I think that the key is going to be complete understanding of what their options are, and then execution on whichever way that is going to end up working best for them, right? Sometimes that means, you know, selling to an individual. Sometimes that means bringing on a partner. Sometimes that means potentially having an associate come on board. Sometimes that means just continue rocking what they got, right? And then also, you know, opening up the options of potentially, you know, looking at different DSOs and private equity backed vehicles, right? And so if we're showing them all of those options, my thought is they'll make the best decision for them, right? And if they make the best decision for them, I think this is a really, really great outcome overall.
Yeah. So let's use the broker word. I mean, you're a broker, right? Basically.
Yep.
And what you said, something there that hit me is it's not, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but let's say a dental practice owner, they're thinking about an exit, right? A transition. Let's say they come to you and say, hey, Kyle, you know, I'm looking to make a transition, that sort of thing. I hear the market and all this kind of stuff, consolidation, et cetera. You immediately, I think this is what you said, you immediately aren't like, well, yeah, let's figure out how we can help you sell your practice.
No.
You dive in and say, hey, what do we got? Kind of walk through that. What's your process when you're looking at the practice? Because maybe selling isn't the best option, right?
Right, completely. Actually, that happens often, surprisingly enough. So, yeah, I think that the best way of making a decision is going to be having all the information in front of you, right? And in order to have all the information in front of you, we kind of have to do a deep dive on the practice, and that's going to be doing a prospectus or an appraisal. We don't charge for those ever. The reason that we don't is I have a really hard time saying that I could give great advice without understanding the business, right? So, you know, we do something like 500 or 600 appraisals on a yearly basis.
Holy cow.
We have a team that does an amazing job. So now CPA, a couple of analysts, they're great. And then quite frankly, I look at every single one as well as we're going through the process, just to make sure we've got enough eyes on it. And that we all agree that, you know, hey, this is what the business is and here are what the potentials are. From that point, I get on a Zoom with every single one of those folks. And the reason being is I think that it's good to have somebody to kind of walk you through what the business is, make sure that we didn't miss anything, right? And then have a good understanding of, okay, this is what your option structure looks like, right? So if you are thinking about bringing on that individual, you really, really, really want to make sure that that person has the exact same training as you do, or whatever the case may be. Or maybe you just don't really understand what's been happening in the dental world from a consolidation standpoint, all that kind of stuff. My thought is, like, if we can spend an hour educating folks, again, it'll get them thinking about the right way of doing this. Now, sometimes what we end up talking about ends up, you know, kind of turning on a light in their brain. And if that's going to be the case, okay, well, then let's start considering these types of options, right? So from there, it's up to us to go out and try to maximize whatever they can get, right? So sometimes that means, okay, don't sell, right? Just keep on working on X, Y, and Z. And I know we're going to be talking about that in a little bit, like what different things you can work on.
So I'm going to stop you right there, Kyle, if you don't mind.
Sure.
What would be, I'm sure there's a million of them. What would be some common reasons maybe that it's not time for them to sell? Like what some of that look like?
Okay, so something I've been running into recently a lot is going to be maybe they just did a big round of investment into their practice, right? So whether that's going to be moving their practice, putting all new equipment in, having an associate come on board. They just bought a 25% stake of the business, and they were kind of pre-investing in that overall growth. Maybe you have a $2 million practice, you just added on another 4 operatories, and you're trying to get it to 3.5 in order to maximize the capacity. Those kind of things. If you just did like a round of investment, maybe it's not the right time, right? Maybe you actually need to see that through, right? Another option or another possibility is going to be, that maybe they have a whole bunch of legacy staff, right? And the legacy staff is, maybe putting undue burden from a payroll standpoint on the practice. Okay, well, there's 2 options there, right? We can either produce more, right, in order to make sure that staff is going to be adequately paid for the size of the practice, or you might need to consider cutting, right, as well. And so we see both those sides, and obviously that's an uncomfortable conversation. It's by far the hardest one that we end up having. And then the final one is going to be maybe they, I've seen it where you just bought a practice like a year or 2 ago. Maybe that's kind of a pre-investment type of thing. Yeah. And you've seen it ramp up, but you've also seen maybe your quality of life decrease, right? And that you got in a little bit over your head, those kind of things. And is it time already to, just take out that debt, right? Or is it a better thing to just kind of put your nose to the grindstone and keep on going for another couple of years in order to make sure to pay down the amount of debt, all those kind of things. So again, you're right, it's 100 different things, but those are probably the 3 biggest that I see as far as kind of reasons to wait.
Yeah, see, that's what I love, like working with you guys. And I'll say sometimes brokers get a bad name. I mean, they do. I wouldn't say sometimes, a lot of times brokers get a bad name. And I think a lot of times is brokers just automatically go to, a client comes to them and it's like, oh, we're going to sell it. That I think is a huge, huge aspect, because you're not telling that prospective client what they want to hear. You're telling them what they need to hear. And I think we said that exact comment in another episode here too. And I think that's what makes you unique and doesn't fit in that broker, because you're trying to help them. You literally are trying to help them, because if they've made an investment or it's not the right time to sell, well, maybe 2 years later, it might be the better time to sell. And they're going to make more money on that biggest decision of their life because it's the biggest asset. So I think that's what sets you guys apart big time.
Well, I appreciate you saying that. Look, I don't bat 1,000, right? I would love to say that I do, but at the same time, if that's kind of the company ethos and that's what we're trying to accomplish, then keep on trying to do those types of activities in order to make that be the right things. So and look, I mean, if you think about it from an incentive standpoint, the way that I make money is going to be on a transaction. I don't do consulting work, right? I don't do any sort of buy-side advisory or anything like that. I only work with sellers, right? And the reason that I do that is that I essentially know where my, compass is always pointed, right? And if I can kind of remove myself from, do we need to do this transaction right now, right? And that's part of the reason that we also do 500, 600 prospectuses, right? Is that, if we work with enough folks, then there's going to be plenty to do over the next however many years, Yeah.
So walk through, let's get a little tactical here. You guys know me, I like to get in the weeds. All right, so let's say you do the analysis, you do the appraisal. I think you said it's a free one, right? So you do the appraisal, you hop on them, you go through their decision, or you go through their analysis, and you're like, hey, yeah, you got a great practice here. And based on everything you told me, it probably makes sense to test the market. Walk us through the process there. What's it look like, and from the client's perspective?
Yeah. So the first thing I try to get across is going to be, one, begin with the end in mind, right? So what is it that we want to see life look like, however many years out that is as well. And then 2, also keep an open mind, right? So DSOs have gotten a bad name, and there's lots of reasons for that. And quite frankly, some of it is very earned, right? But the interesting thing that I've found is going to be, I think DSOs are actually pretty similar to dentists, or at least a reflection of dentistry. I think there are good clinicians and I think there are bad clinicians out there. I think there are good DSOs and there are bad ones out there as well. And what we end up finding, kind of over the course of time are going to be, we get to know who the good ones are and who the ones that we don't have nearly as much respect for, right? And then as we end up kind of making the market there, we're going to learn which one is going to be the right fit. So here's what I mean by making the market. So let's say that it's time for them to consider what those options can look like. So one, we look at both individual and group buyers, right? If it's a big enough practice, we also bring in private equity funds as well, if there's going to be a direct investment.
Okay.
But let's say on a normal size practice, so call it, the $1 million to $5 million range, we're going to be looking at those two types of options. If you have a big enough practice, then most likely you're going to be running into debt ceilings in terms of how much an individual can get from a bank to buy into a practice, or buy
Talking about another
practice.
doctor, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So an individual dentist. Yep. So let's say you've got a $4 million practice and you appraise the practice at, $3,300,000 for an individual to come and purchase that business. Most likely that person can't take out a $3.3 million loan,
Right.
right? There's just not that person out there. So then you can sell it in parts, right? So that kind of goes back to the old Mercer way of doing things, right? So you might sell a 50% stake or a 33% stake and then turn around and sell another 33% stake to someone else to just stay under those debt ceilings. And you can also maximize the amount that you can get by doing that as well from an individual standpoint. But if you are a more robust practice, then by looking at groups as well, what that essentially allows for is going to be taking the bank out of the picture, right? So that debt ceiling is essentially not important anymore. And so one of the big things that private equity has done by entering the dental market is essentially it has corrected a market problem. And the market problem has been, for the longest time, dental practices have been undervalued, right? And it's because of this debt ceiling concept, right? I wrote a white paper back in 2008 about how dental practices were severely undervalued. And I went out and bought a whole bunch of practices because of it, right? So I've owned 25 practices myself.
So
the reason.
Let me stop you there real quick. So you're saying they're undervalued.
Yep.
Because of the debt ceiling, what a buyer is able to borrow to acquire it.
Yep.
Why? Because banks, institutions, whatever, are looking at this and lending on this. Why aren't they smart enough to know that they're worth more and can give more?
Well, so it is. So from a cash flow perspective, they are worth more. Empirically, we can prove it, right? However, from a risk standpoint, they're not, right? And so the risk is going to be if that bank is essentially betting on those two doctors' hands, if they get in a mountain bike accident or if something bad happens to them, yeah, the family's going to be taken care of. Most likely they have all the insurance in the world, but the bank, they're not, right? The bank is left holding the bag on everything. So because of that, they have these debt ceilings, right? That says, I'm not willing to take any more risk than this amount on these two hands, right? And so even though from a cash flow perspective, it works out really, really nicely, a car wash can be run by anyone, right? So a car wash gets the requisite value because you have an asset that anybody can handle, right? Dental practice does not. And the reason being is the only person that you can sell that asset to is going to be another dentist, right? So anyway, so private equity, I think, has come in and fixed this problem, right? And they're coming in and buying practices for essentially what I would consider more requisite values, right? Which is going to be looking at them as an investment, right? And so the key here is going to be pitting them against each other, right? To make sure that we achieve the correct market price, right? I end up talking about this a fair amount. If you're looking at selling your house and somebody, or you're not looking at selling your house, you have a house, you love it. Somebody sends you a letter and says, I would love to buy your house. What is the chances that you end up getting a market price from that person? Essentially zero. Right?
Exactly.
It's not going to happen. So whether you or whether somebody else goes out to market in order to put the house on the market, you're not going to achieve the correct market price. The exact same thing is true with DSOs, right? I end up thinking about, DSOs that end up sending out letters, right, to all these different folks and saying, hey, we want to buy your practice. Well, of course they do, right? And they would love to buy it for as little as possible as well, right? And so essentially, I think about those folks as going to be funding my deals, right? Because they're going to get good deals on those, and they're going to have to pay up on ones that we actually bring to market, right? So anyway, all of that being said, actually, that leads me to a story. I remember early on in my career, I spoke at a couple dental schools, and I got asked the question, hey, how do we end up buying a practice? How would you do it if you were us?
Yeah.
And I was like, send out letters. Like, go know where you want to be, start sending out letters, canvass the area. And that way, one, you're going to have options, right? Because there's going to be, folks that are older, folks that are interested in selling, all that kind of stuff. They're going to answer your letter, right? And then what is the next thing is going to happen is that you're going to get a good deal, right? The reason being is now you have options in that area and you can choose the lowest priced one, right?
Yeah.
So anyway, look, this is not a new concept, right? This is the exact same thing the DSOs are doing as well. But I think the key is going to be making that market in order to make sure to achieve the highest price point.
Yeah, that makes sense. So kind of tangenting a little bit, not too far, I don't think, but we asked this on another episode too, but the reason that you're going to get a better dollar amount or valuation on a DSO potential sale versus a doctor to doctor is really that debt ceiling issue. And for a doctor to doctor, where private equity DSOs don't have that debt ceiling issue because they have more access to capital. Is that fair?
Yes, that's true. So essentially, if you look at it from an upfront valuation standpoint, let's say you've got $1 million, but you've got $1 million practice, right? If we end up selling that to an individual, we're going to get $800,000 for it. Good practice.
80% of collections, yeah.
Yeah, something like that. If we end up looking at it from an investment standpoint, let's say they're running 20% margins, right? Those kind of things, that's pretty typical for an EBITDA standpoint. I'm going to get somewhere and call it, the 5 to 6 times type of deal for that. Okay. So you're kind of in the 1 million to 1.2 range. So essentially, by just changing who the buyer is, I've automatically, garnered something like, call it $300,000 delta there, right?
Yeah. And I'm going to break that down real fast, just so make people can, because we in the industry talk fast and assume maybe things, but what you just said, like $1 million practice, if you were to sell to a doctor, you say 80% of collections, so sell for 800,000.
Yep.
Right. If you look at that DSO, you're looking at $1 million practice, same practice, 20% margins, EBITDA, right? So it's 200K. And then you just said a 5 to 6-ish multiple. So that puts you up to $1 million, $1.2 million. Yep. So you see that difference there on the valuation just right there. Yep. Sorry to interrupt. Just want to break.
No, that's exactly true. And I think that difference is just based on what we talked about, which is going to be debt ceiling, right? Yep. So there's no other difference except for debt ceiling there. Now, here's the next part of it. The next way that you can make more doing that way is by utilizing equity arbitrage, right? So it's essentially changing where your equity lives. Right now, a dentist, if you own $1 million practice, all of your equity lives in that practice. If you end up changing where that equity lives, either to a holding company where you own 100 different dental practices, or by doing a joint venture type of deal where you can still own your own practice, but now by being a part of a larger group, it's worth a whole bunch more, right? But by taking advantage of those types of concepts, we can double and triple the type of outcome that you can achieve.
Okay, hit on that a little more. Like how do you equity arbitrage? I talk about arbitrage all the time. Interest rates arbitrage, everything, but
sure.
How does a dental practice owner equity arbitrage their practice like that?
Yep. Okay, so I'll give you an analogy. So let's consider your that person's practice as Apple stock, right? Apple stock is great. It provides a really great return, a nice dividend for anybody who holds it, et cetera. However, if you think about that investment, that's still inherently risky. You're still betting on one company. That's essentially what most practice owners are doing. It's an inherently risky investment, right? Which is why all these debt ceilings exist. So if it's an inherently risky investment, if people are kind of chasing away from the type of risk, then what do you buy? You buy mutual funds, right? Mutual funds are great, but they don't grow as fast, right? They don't grow as fast potentially. And the reason being is that, you're de-risking yourself, right? So what happens during an equity arbitrage event, specifically during consolidation, is going to be not only does that mutual fund of dental practices grow a whole bunch faster than what an individual practice can grow, but it provides a lot greater returns for the investors. So early on, private equity groups and the founders of the DSOs were the only ones who benefited, right? But now with the competition in the market, what we've seen is going to be that the doctors can be very, very large beneficiaries of this equity arbitrage. So where your $1 million practice, might have been worth in the open market $800,000 to an individual or $1.2 million to a DSO, the very next day that dental practice transacts into that environment, that $200,000 worth of EBITDA that we just talked about a minute ago, that $200,000 is typically worth 12 times, right? So if it's suddenly worth 12 times, we've just made that practice worth $2.4 million just by changing where it lives, right? There's really no other change. That practice is still taking care of the patients the exact same way, all that kind of stuff. Same practice, exact same protocol. We haven't even talked about, the potential buying power, all those kind of things, but the exact same practice in a new environment is worth a lot different, right? I've heard a lot of people talking about currency exchanges in this way as well, where your dollar is worth more in certain places if you travel, so if you go down to Mexico, your dollar is going to go a lot farther than where it's going to go here. And it's kind of the same type of look at it by grouping together dental practices and having a much more significant outcome on the back end.
So let's dive into that a little deeper, if you don't make sense, because the equity arbitrage, I mean, I understand the concept. I see this stuff all the time, but let's walk through a specific deal if we can. We got a doctor to doctor transit. Let's use this $1 million practice. Doctor to doctor transaction, let's say 800,000. You got this DSO deal. I know what's the thing I've heard? If you've seen one DSO deal, you've seen one DSO deal, right? Because they're all different. So many different creative. I want to use that word.
There's 350 of them out there now.
That's nuts, isn't it?
Yeah,
nuts. And there's 350 different ways to skin a cat, right? I mean, it's just a different beast. Walk through one way DSO structure that transition to use that equity arbitrage term on how you can replace or not replace is take that equity in your practice and put it over here to get that different valuation in that concept.
Can I give you two ways? I'll give you the two major ways.
Okay? Not 350, but just two.
Not 350, but two major ways, right? Okay, so the two major ways, or one is going to be, let's say a DSO comes in and buys 100% of your practice. You're getting a little bit of a bump on it, right? Because they don't have to worry about the debt ceiling, right? Okay. So that $1 million practice, they're going to pay you $1.2 million for it. Now, what you may end up choosing to do is you take $800,000 off the table, right? So you're just going to go ahead and pocket it, and you decide to invest in real estate or stock market or whatever else with that. But that additional $400,000, you might be able to invest into their equity platform, right? Which may be the same type of stock that the private equity company has, right? So now what we've essentially made you into is a private equity investor within that platform, right? Private equity investors are very, very good at these types of investments. They've been done, we have hundreds of transactions at this point to prove this out. And a long story short is that equity now grows in that platform at something like 60 to 80% on a yearly basis, right? So over a 5-year time horizon, you're essentially going to multiply whatever you invested by 5, right? Yeah. So you take that amount that you did, $400,000, you invest, so you multiply that by 5 times. You now already have $2 million on the back end, right, of a 5-year time horizon, and you get the $800,000 you get up front. We've taken your practice that was worth $800,000 to an individual, and over a 5-year time horizon, we've monetized it at $2.8 million.
Yeah. Right. So let's get a little deeper there. So you the 1.2. Right. You're getting in your example, I think what you're saying, you're getting 800,000 cash, and that 400K, the spread between the 1.2, 800 is what you get over here in a doctor transition anyway, right? Yep. So you're getting what you would have gotten over here, and that spread, that additional uptick of 400, you're reinvesting up in the holdco or whatever it is, and letting that ride, if you will.
Yes. Yep. Now you may, everybody has a different risk profile, right? So I've had different people that say, I'm only going to invest $100,000. That's fine, right? I've had different people that invest 80% of their proceeds in it. Now, am I the type of risk profile that would take that on? Nope, no way, right? However, I do know those guys, they did very well on that, but all that being said, it has to do with your risk profile, how many chips you do want to take off the table, what you want your life to look like afterwards, what you want your commitment to look like afterwards, all those different types of things. But that's one way of doing it is essentially being a private equity investor into an entire ecosystem. Another way is going to be by utilizing some version of a joint venture, right? A joint venture where you might sell a certain percentage of the business up front, right? So let's say, again, you have that $1 million practice, $1.2 million purchase price, you might sell 60% of it, right? So you're going to be selling something like $720,000 worth of value, you're pocketing that, and then you're letting the rest of it ride within your own practice. Now, there's reasons to do this. As a matter of fact, probably the way that I'm built as a person, I might like this a little bit better. And the reason being is that I like to know that what I'm doing still has meaning within my own ecosystem, right? That by being an investor, it's just going. It's, you know, it's kind of nebulous. It's just you're hoping that it's growing, all that kind of stuff, but really you don't really see that all that often. On a joint venture, you're able to see the value of your work because you typically still get distributions, right? And if you grow the practice, you get the direct benefit of that growth, right? So let's say over that same 5-year time horizon, it might not grow quite as fast, right? And so you're giving up something by doing that. You're probably, you know, it's still a little bit more risky, but you probably still feel like you have a little bit more agency there as well. So one way or the other, I mean, think that everybody kind of revolves around these two types of concepts. And again, there's 350 different ways that everybody skins that cat.
Okay. So 2 questions. These might be hard questions, but I don't think you've ever seen a hard question in your life. Number 1, what would you say to that person out there? Because I've heard it before, right? Who in your first example, they buy 100% of the practice and you let the 400K ride, let's say, and invest, right? And there's people out there like, well, that's just worthless. That stock is worthless, or that investment is worthless, and don't count on that. I've heard that several times, right? How would you respond to that, or which it is an investment, I guess I'll say.
Yeah.
But how would you respond to that?
Yeah, I have a really, really, really hard time. I mean, like, look, I'm a numbers guy, right? And
me too.
And I have a really hard time saying that you're comparing apples to apples if you say you can't count on the future, right? If we can't count on the future, then essentially, if you have your own practice, can we count on that, right? I mean, I don't know. So yeah, I understand that you have an insurance policy that'll kind of pay you out by a certain amount, but you're probably going to have that regardless, right? So you're probably still going to have your disability policy rolling. You're probably still going to have, you know, some sort of, you know, business insurance rolling there. So you're still going to be protected, but which one is less risky? I would tell you that a group of dental practices is way less risky than what an individual is. And again, I can kind of prove it. And the reason being is we have these bankers out there, they're telling us this is what the market is for these 2 different ecosystems. One of them we have a debt ceiling for, and it's because we're not willing to take that risk or any additional risk beyond this. And one of them we have a way different debt ceiling, right? And essentially it's because whenever you group together providers, actually, I love this stat. Are you familiar with the success rate of dental practices?
Oh
yeah. So it's a 99.7% success rate. So it's a 0.3% default rate.
Yeah.
Very, very, very low.
Pretty
right?
good.
It's very good. And so if you think about it, the more practices that you can put together this with similar default rates, then essentially you've solved for the one that doesn't work, right? And so it's getting more dots on the map is super, super important, right? The more practitioners you have within your practice, that's typically going to be a good thing. So if something happens to one person, it's not going to completely and totally hurt you, right? So look, I understand the theory that says, well, you're not, who knows about that in the future? I guess what I would say is, well, we don't know what tomorrow is going to bring anyway, right? And so if we don't know what tomorrow is going to bring, let's make the right financial decision based on the information we have.
I guess to say that when your experience doing this and transitioning hundreds, I don't know how many practices, but a bunch on an annual, if you're looking at 500 to 600, you're transitioning several of those in an annual basis. Your experience, you've seen this play out, right? You've seen where the investment has returned significant multiple than what they were bought out at. If that makes sense, they were bought out at a 5 to 6. You've seen it transact at a
one of my favorite stories. One of our analysts is the son of a doctor that we'd worked with in the past, and we'd met this guy. He had a $3.8 million practice, 3 owners and an associate near the Dallas area. And he originally called us because he was looking to exit. So he was the oldest of the different partners. And look, it was a nice practice. We think we could have sold his portion of the business for something like 1.4 million or so. So I mean, that's a nice chunk of change. If there's $1.4 million sitting on the ground, most people are going to pick it up, right? Sure. But whenever we started to think through it, it's like, well, I mean, the financial outcome for you and your partners could be much greater by considering DSO options. I don't remember how many different folks approached this. It was probably 60, once we brought it to market. We culled it down to the top, I think 9, something like that. And then they end up choosing which one they thought was going to be the best fit for them. So they did not choose the highest offer, by the way. They chose the one that they thought was going to be the best fit, which I'm a big fan of. And if you look at the total outcome, the financial outcome, instead of having an ecosystem that, each third of it was worth 1.7 million, so maybe $5 million in change, we ended up transacting that ecosystem at 13.4 million.
Whoa.
Right. So, and again, I would love to tell you that that is a unicorn story. It is not, right? There's a lot of them that are kind of like that. And so anyway, I think that I would also tell you that I've got stories on the other side too, right? So, a $2.6 million pedo practice in Georgia, we had all sorts of interest from DSOs on that one. And once the guy saw those different types of offers, he ended up choosing an individual that he sold 50% to. He just wanted somebody to live life with, right?
Yeah.
And by the way, he didn't make the wrong decision, right? My thought is that if you have all the information at your fingertips, you'll make the right decision for you, regardless of whatever the millions of dollars could be, right?
Yeah.
And so anyway, again, we're big fans of that. Most people do end up going down the route of the consolidation and riding the wave there. What we did 88 transactions this last year, 73 of them went into a DSO or private equity space.
Wow.
This year we're probably doing 120, more than 100 of them. I'm sure we'll end up doing the same. But again, I think that's consolidation is a very, very, very large factor, and there's a lot of things that are pushing us that way too.
Yeah, interesting. The more and more we talk and the more and more things you say brings more and more questions I'm going to ask, and I'll try to be short, but you hit on one thing. I think your example maybe of the $3.8 million practice, I see it quite often where you've got a bigger practices, let's say 3 owners, and you've got one, I'm going to use the word older, right? Let's say they're 60, right? And you've got a couple other owners that are younger.
Yeah.
And they're like, well, I don't want to transact and sell the entire business to a DSO because the younger ones are going to work another 10, 15 years.
Yep.
What you're saying, it still can be advantageous to, of course, the older doctor, but the younger ones too, to take a peek and see what options are, because you could have, there's value there, right?
Yes. I mean, our average age of client is 44, right?
Yeah.
And so, there's actually a really specific reason for that. And it's going to be because the longer that you have your equity live in an arbitrage environment, the more advantageous it is for you, right?
Say that again. Say that again.
The longer that you have your equity live in an arbitraged environment, so again, in a de-risked and something that can grow faster, the more beneficial it is. So the guy who's 60 or 70, and maybe has a couple years left or whatever that number is, the type of benefit that he's going to receive or she's going to receive is going to be way different than what an individual who is in their 40s is going to receive, because you can live it for longer
because
right?
of the time.
Yeah, exactly.
The time it's living
time is
there,
on your side. Yep. Now here's the thing. I mean, equity arbitrage doesn't last forever, right? And so consolidation, we're probably about halfway through it. So we're about 30%, 35% consolidated as an industry. We're going towards something like 60 or 70% over the next 7 years or so. We probably have 2 private equity cycles left, right? You still have the benefit of saying either way can be good, right? So, grow your practice for a year, get on the equity arbitrage bandwagon, or, decide that you're not going to be a part of it. All of those are completely and totally legitimate decisions. My tone will probably change in another 2 years, right? Which is like, oh man, you got some serious things to think about at this point. But right now, I think any of those 3 options is amenable. Okay.
Now you said you said 2 private equity cycles left, 2 or 3 or whatever. What do you mean by private equity cycle?
Yeah. So quick crash course on the way, private equity works is going to be, let's say that you are a person that has, $10 million in the bank, $10 million in investments, $10 million in properties, all that kind of stuff. And you've got another $10 million that you're not 100% sure what you want to do with. It's a nice problem to have. So you might get approached by a fund manager. That fund manager says, we are putting together a group of investors to achieve certain business goals, right? Maybe that's going out and buying car washes. Maybe that's going out and buying manufacturing facilities, and more recently going out and buying dental practices. If you are one of those folks, you say, okay, I'm willing to give you 5 million of the 10 million that I've got on the sidelines, right? And the fund manager says that's great. Now here's the thing, I need a guarantee that you can't ask for this back for 5 years. We need to go out and achieve our business goals, right? And because you can't ask for it back for 5 years, I'm going to guarantee you a rate of return. that might be 12%, right?
Sure.
So 12% on your money, but you can't ask for it back, right?
Yep.
So during that 5-year time horizon, it's now that fund's goal to go out and achieve those different business goals, right? So let's say it is dental practice, dental practice consolidation. What they're typically going to want to do is they want to buy a group of practices first, right? They don't want to go out and buy each one individually. It's going to take way too long, right? So they're going to go out and buy, 20, 30, 40, 100, 500 practices all at one time, and then go out and add additional practices to them. They'll buy the group of practices for way more than what an individual practice is. And the reason being is it gives them a jump start, right? So it gives them a jump start. They go out and buy all the other practices, cost average themselves.
And they don't have the debt ceiling issue because they just got a huge investment. Yeah.
Yep, exactly. So over that 5-year time horizon, sometimes you run out of money. Like say you've got a $500 million fund, maybe you've already used it all, right? And at that point, you end up transacting with another group looking to do the exact same thing. Or let's say the 5 years comes up and you have to fund your investors. Well, then you are required to have an exit anyway, right? Because if you don't, then you can't pay your investors back. That's not typically good for a fund, right? So overall, we look at fund cycles as about a 5-year cycle, right? Now, it has been faster than that in dentistry. Lots of times you're transacting every 3 years, 4 years, but somewhere between 3 and 5 years is a typical private equity cycle. And our thought is that it's going to take, at least 7 years to consolidate the rest of the dental practices out there. And so we have something like 2 cycles left, something like that.
Okay. So you see consolidation in the end, and I've heard all kinds of different numbers on this, but maybe getting to, I think you said 60, 70%, which means 70% owned by, I'm going to say DSOs, group practices, and then the other 30 still that sole owner.
And there's lots of comps that get us there. I mean, look, if you look at other medical, you can look at a lot of different industries, and it essentially kind of gets to this type of stasis point. I think that there are people out there that say it's going to go deeper than that. I think that the ones that are most likely not going to be consolidated are like, more niche style practices. It might be a more rural style practice. There's a lot of debate on, what Medicaid is going to end up doing as well. So there's either a group that says, no, all of them are definitely going to be consolidated because of the regulatory environment. There's a group of people that says they won't be because of the risk, all that kind of stuff. One way or the other, I think it's pretty safe to say that 60 to 70%, which means you don't ever have to do it anyway, right? If we get to that 60 to 70% stasis and you've kind of rode that through, you still have a practice on the back end of it. Now, you didn't take advantage of the equity arbitrage, but that doesn't mean you had to, right? It just means that you decided not to.
Yeah. Yep. Okay. One big question here. Of course, I'm dating this, right? We're in July of 2022. Interest rates are increasing, right? I guess we're officially in a recession now, right? For the first 2 quarters of 2022. How are you seeing that impact the market? Just in general, it doesn't have to be the DSO market, but just in general, are prices coming down on valuations, people buying as many practices, that sort of thing?
Yeah, so I would say that we've seen zero difference. If anything, we've seen an uptick. And so there's a couple of good reasons for that as well. So if you think about, again, the way that private equity works, if you go around and raise that fund to $500 million and you can't ask for it back for 5 years, that's kind of in a lockbox, right? And so we're a little bit insulated from it, quite frankly. Now, that doesn't mean that they don't utilize debt. They do. These are leveraged buyouts. There's typically going to be debt held somewhere, right? And so that debt cost as an eventuality will make a difference. We're still probably in a time horizon that people are working through a revolving line of credit that they have already negotiated. So the negotiation has already taken place. As a long-term, I mean, if you buy a practice at too much where it can't handle the debt, right, then suddenly that's not a good situation for the DSO to be in, right? So as interest rates continue to tick up, do I expect some sort of multiple decrease? Yeah, probably, but it won't be dramatic, right? So I think that the way it will be dramatic is going to be, will those same funds be re-upped in the next 3 to 5 years? And if they're not, then suddenly that could drive the market down, right? But I still think we have quite a good time horizon left on valuations.
Yeah. You see how much this guy knows about the market, guys? I mean, it's just, he knows it in and out. He sees it. He lives it every day. I mean, he looks at 600 dental practices a year. I mean, this is the guy you want on your side when you're looking to make your biggest decision by selling your biggest asset, So Kyle, I appreciate it, man. I mean, this is great stuff. I mean, just one more step further, they come to you, they do the evaluation, then they kind of know, which may be the first time in a forever or a long, long time, to actually know their numbers, how much their practice is worth.
I've actually started asking the question, hey, when was the last time that you looked at how much your practice was worth? And most of the time was whenever I bought it.
Yeah.
So yeah.
They just don't, they don't look at their numbers. We see that every day, and, but I mean, jumping in and doing that, and then making the informed decision of, hey, it's not the right time to sell. You will tell them that, which I love. Or it is maybe the right time to sell based on your why of what you want on the outset, or what the outlook needs to look for you. And you and the cool thing I love you guys do is you go out to market, right? You go out to market, you try to get as many interested buyers. Is once you do is you bring those back in, and you guys dive into all those different deals. Cause like I said, they're all different. And then you put them like on a scorecard, right? It looks at them side by side and explains and educates the difference.
Yep. Well, and I also, I feel like there are some groups out there that make their letters of intent very flowery, right? And make it look maybe better than what it is. And so what I like to do is, again, if you put everything on a scorecard where it compares everything apples to apples, and you can decide what things you actually are putting value in, then it will make the decision more informed, right? And there are plenty of people, by the way, whenever we go to market, that end up saying, nah, do you know what? None of these are kind of the right thing for us. And not only do we end up doing that, putting everything on a scorecard, but let's say they pick their favorite one, then we're going to compare it over a certain time horizon with what they could do with their own practice by just keeping it, right? So we want to make sure that it's like a fully informed, and make sure that you have, a really good idea on return over time.
Yeah, I like that word, flowery. That's a really good way to put it. I mean, because I think that's why a lot of times DSOs might get a bad name, especially when they're looking to bring in deals, is a lot of times they're salesmen, right? I hate to say that word, but they're salesmen. They're trying to get the deal. And so they're going to put it in a way that makes the total package look really big, bold letters, whatever. But then when you get down to the fine print, like maybe you're not going to get all 2 million on day one. Maybe you're going to get this, and you got to look at the guts of it.
Can I tell you my biggest pet peeve?
Yeah.
Okay. My biggest pet peeve is whenever you see a letter of intent come in and they essentially say, okay, for this $1 million practice, our total value that we're giving you is 2.1 million. It's just like, okay, maybe that's true. So you start to dig through it, and they end up having $900,000 of what we would call earn ups, right? So the practice has to grow for them to achieve these things. By the way, those are nice. I consider that icing, right? So if you end up getting those things and you end up hitting them over the course of time, then everybody's very, very, very happy. But that is not something the practice is doing right now, right? And so if it's not something the practice is doing, why are we calling that value, right? And they almost always, by the way, call them earnouts. It is wrong. It is not the right way of thinking about it. They are earn ups, right? Earn outs means the practice is doing what it's doing right now, and you get paid out on it. Earn up means the practice is going to be doing more over the course of time, and you get a benefit for that.
Yeah, I've even seen it too, where a typical DSO transaction, the doctor's going to stay on for a period of time. Maybe not always, but most of the time, I would say, right? I've even seen it where they've included the compensation they're going to be received up into the value of the practice. I'm like, come on now, that's what they're going to make anyway.
I know. They do the exact same thing. Sometimes they'll do it with rent too, right? So they're like, you put in, okay, so the doctor owns the building, so you're also getting rent. It's like, but guys, I mean, like, we're not, again, so I think it's important to compare everything apples to apples, right? So if you're going to get the rent either way, if you're going to get your compensation either way, then just take that off the table. You're going to get it no matter what. Let's think about the net delta or the net difference that you're going to achieve.
Exactly. That is it. So this is why, guys, I mean, it's so, the sales can get so complicated. They can, and that's why you need people on your corner that have seen this stuff before and know this stuff in and out, just like Kyle and his team. So Kyle, I appreciate it, man. I want you to do one thing before you leave, if that's cool. Dental practice owner right now out there thinking about selling in the next, maybe tomorrow, or maybe in 5 years, 3 years, what can they think about? What do they need to be doing today to really maximize the value, educate themselves to make a good transition?
The one thing I would have them do is get your practice praised, whether it's us or whether it's someone else. Just understand what you're working with, because it'll allow you to begin with the end in mind, right? And that does not mean that you need to do anything at that point, but at least understand what it looks like. And then from there, I think you can make a lot of other decisions. We call it a decision tree, right? There's a lot of other decisions that can be made from there about whether you should optimize practice, whether you should consider a sale, all these other things. But man, if it was me, I would want to know what the value is that what you have right now.
So Kyle, so one last thing I want to ask you. So if you're thinking the dental practice owner listening right now, what do they need to be, if they're looking to sell, make a transition, I should say, what do they need to be doing today, tomorrow, in order to maximize the value of their practice and set themselves up for the best transition?
Yeah. So if it was me, I would want to begin with the end in mind, and that is by doing an appraisal on the practice. Again, whether that's us or whether that's someone else, I would say that it is an important thing to know what the value is that you have, because that'll inform the rest of your decisions, right?
Yeah.
So typically we consider those decision trees, where you can decide, okay, do I need to work on the practice? Should I consider a sale? Should I consider an individual partner or a group, et cetera? But I think all of that comes from understanding what it is that you have. Once you know what that is, it makes all the other decisions kind of fall in line.
Yeah, it's the whole point A to point B. I mean, if you can't get to point B unless you know where you are now, right? Point A.
Completely.
Yeah.
Yep.
So Kyle, I appreciate it, man. I mean, if you guys have questions, Kyle, how can they reach out if they want? I mean, you said free appraisal. How can they reach out to you to kind of get in contact?
So, I mean, probably the easiest way is, if you just go on our website, right? So, we have, the chat box there, or whether you just email us, right? So info@professionaltransition.com. All of our contact information is all over the site as well. So www.professionaltransition.com. Both of them are singular, Professional Transition. And that's probably the easiest way to get a hold of us.
Yeah, that's perfect. We'll put all the info here in the show notes. But Kyle, I appreciate it, man. You are a wealth of knowledge. You guys out there listening, again, I say this every episode. I guarantee this time you've heard something out there like it's a gold nugget that's an aha moment that's like, hey, I know my buddy John needs to hear this. All right, do that. And if you hear that, share the episode. Again, like I say, subscribe to the episode, leave us a rating, leave us a review, reach out to Kyle if you're interested in, hey, what's my practice even worth now? Maybe you're not going to sell it to 10 years. What's it worth now? And just educate yourself, because Kyle, that is what you guys do in the industry. And we appreciate you, man.
Thanks, buddy. Appreciate you.
Perfect. All right, everybody out there, have a great week. We'll talk to you guys soon. Take care.